to the Sikh Network Podcast, a weekly podcast discussing current and topical issues affecting Sikhs across the global diaspora.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Sikh Network Podcast. It's great to be bringing you this first episode. We'll be touching on a wide range of issues that affect Sikhs both in the UK and around the world. I'm delighted to be joined by the first two guests of the first ever show, both Sikh Network members, both founder Jaz Singh and also Sikh Network member Mankamal Singh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So I just want to start with you, Jaz. Obviously, as being the founder of the Sikh Network itself, and I think this kind of podcast gives us the opportunity to kind of probably refresh a little bit what the Sikh Network is and what it was there to do, and obviously what this sort of podcast is kind of there to do as well. So, Jaz, kind of in your own words, do you want to, I suppose, give us a bit of a brief intro into yourself, the background and the formation of the Sikh Network?
Sure, thanks. So many people, including Mankamal Singh and many others, been active around the Panthak scene for a number of years. And a lot of us are professionals in our daily backgrounds. And we got together and the concept of the Sikh Network really formalized in 2015, because whilst a number of organizations have been active around various issues, we felt that youngsters, particularly professionals, found it harder to connect, not only with Sikh issues, but how they could contribute, how they could participate in their seva. Whether the only routes really were through Gurdwara committees or older organizations, established orgs, which unless they kind of knew where to go, it was kind of we were turning talent away from the Qawm.
Right.
And that was the concept of setting up an open network, which would be available for anybody of any views, but we wanted to shape it around connecting and representing Sikhs and waking people up around the political environment in the UK. And that would be all parties and provide a better understanding to our politicians. So a lot of it is probably one of the largest networks in the UK now. And it consists of a range of professionals, lawyers, academics, politicians, charity workers, etc. And we are responsible. The Sikh Network is mostly sort of known for and responsible for the highly acclaimed Sikh Manifesto, which was the official document that contained the key issues for Sikhs. It was launched in 2015 and 2019 for the UK general elections.
So it was refreshed in 2019, yeah?
Yeah, obviously the election that we had then, it was a 5-year term for each of these manifestos. Both are available on the Sikh Network website, but they contained and summarized the key issues that were relevant to Sikhs, both in the UK and in Punjab, but very well pointed to politicians in this country of what they could do as elected members on those issues. And I think it was the first time we'd actually compiled such a document. And it was, we had a consultation from many people around the UK, many Sikhs, many organizations came together for that. And the second thing we launched was the UK Sikh Survey, which again is the largest independent survey of UK Sikhs, which we conduct every 2 years. And over 4,500 Sikhs responded to that. And that gives us valuable empirical data on the Sikh community in this country, where it lives, how it's educated, how it contributes to British society, what are its issues, what are its needs, from a data perspective, which has been very helpful and used by the APPG for British Sikhs, which is the all-party parliamentary group, and other bodies, because you then have a data reference point that never existed before the survey.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's really some great insight there. And Mankamal Singh as well, just to kind of bring you in here, do you want to give us again just a real brief background about yourself and your kind of, I suppose, what are the key areas that you kind of focus on within the Sikh Network and the seva that they do?
I mean, Jazz has really touched on all the points, but I think I was going to re-emphasize what he's said in terms of the network came about to really utilize the talent pool that exists out there of us as individuals, as Sikhs, professional or strengths in very different ways, and it's an untapped talent pool, and it will remain untapped unless we create some kind of coordination around that, and that's what we initially set up, and that's what interested me into bringing myself on board on the network. I mean, it was to take us away from what we had seen as a traditional model, which was very much ivory towers and individuals in ivory towers making that decision. So this was about grassroots, and it was about bringing grassroots individuals who are on the ground, their feet on the ground, and at the same time, they are engaged and involved in political engagement be it Westminster or whatever is required from us. So that was what brought us on board, and that's always been our aim, is to work on that basis.
Great. Now you mentioned something quite important there, sort of, I suppose, word to the ground and kind of getting, I suppose, things in action on the ground. So I suppose that leads us on to I suppose the first subject that we really want to discuss on the Sikh Network podcast, and political engagement, political representation is certainly at the heart of this. So in particular, I wanted to talk about the political landscape in Punjab at the moment, based on sort of what's happening at the moment, and also events really since the Kisan Morcha and sort of subsequent events that have led to that as well. So I suppose, Jazz, again, if we kind of start with you in particular, I mean, just as I'd mentioned, the Kisan Morcha seems to have been the stimulant that's kicked off a wave of activity. And I think even recently, if we talk about what's going on at the moment with social media, I think everyone might have seen a clip, a reel, a story of Amritpal Singh, and sort of conveying his story of his dramatic rise kind of at the moment, and which kind of leads him to be the head of Waris Punjab there. Jazz, really what I wanted to ask you is, a lot of people might have seen clips of Amritpal Singh. Can you kind of touch on who he is, what he kind of represents, and what he's currently achieving at the moment on the political landscape in Punjab?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a really sort of critical point for Punjab, and I'd say activism in Punjab and wider in India, because for years there's been throwaway comments that is only people from abroad who campaigning for human rights or self-determination or raising these issues of the past. And actually now, whilst you've had organizations actively working and campaigning for justice of 1984, of the Sikh genocides, of Beadbi of Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj, and all of the discrimination in Punjab against Sikhs, they've largely been quite ignored or challenged by the Punjab state themselves. So it's been really difficult. We've seen it with the prisoners issues, Bandi Singh issues, and the list goes on, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't till the farmers' protest, the Kisan Morcha, that bring a reawakening in the youth of Punjab. Even though a large percentage of those protesters were initially elderly, Babbe, you can call them, elderly farmers that marched down to Delhi and camped there for a year. But as that continued day by day, it gave an awakening, and you could even call it a slap in the face for the Najwan of Punjab, that look, what's going on? The government of their country has basically discriminated against them, took their land and their livelihood, and their elders are there camping on streets, and these guys were oblivious. And suddenly there's this huge wave of awakening in Punjab, and predominantly led by Sikhs. And what they needed were figureheads, because that's what I think lacked in the movement for Najwans. Is a lot of the elders who were involved in the movement or historically were of a different generation, and they couldn't connect with the Najwan of Punjab today. And then when you have recognized artists like Deep Sidhu, like Sidhu Moosewala, like Kanwar Garewal.
Yeah.
The list goes on of Punjabi singers, Punjabi actors, Jazzy B. Many of these people landed in Delhi and they spoke at the stage, and they reinvigorated the ideals of the Punjab youth that is relevant to this morcha. And specifically Deep Sidhu, I think, stood above and beyond all others, because the thing that really stood out about Deep Sidhu and the Kisan Morcha is he captured the true essence of that agitation.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just about these 3 farm laws. It wasn't just about the MSP, the price of crop, and big corporates taking over land. Yes, that was the foundation of these bills and the critical part of it. But what Deep Sidhu identified and shared was that this was an attack by the central government at Punjab itself and the identity of Sikhs and the people of Punjab. That this was another step in that elimination or assimilation of Punjab into the wider Hindutva, wider Hindustan. And I think because he identified that instilled the whole, if you like, the revolutionary aspect of the Kisan Morcha. And it's absolutely true, and we won't go into it, but the Kisan unions, some of them sort of were very hesitant to go down that path. But the Naujawans, you can see, and Lakha Sadana was the other main figurehead, who was very active in Punjab, whereas Deep Sidhu, you could say, was fairly new. And there were some questions or trust issues around his intentions, all of which were unfounded. But there was, Lakha had history behind him. So I think those two starting that morcha off, I think, lit the touch paper for where we are today and laid the foundations of where we are today. But what they did was, and what I'll end on, and what we can discuss it further, will be what they did is they whilst you had that reawakening, they based it on the foundations that were put in Punjab from the 80s.
Yeah.
So realizing that we were a Ghulam Qawm, an enslaved community, which is psychologically enslaved, is what that means, is that whilst we're free in Punjab, we might think it's great. Actually, are we free economically, socially? Is our religion free? Well, the reality is it's not. And they built on those foundations done by many of the Shaheed Singhs and the Tarmiyud Morcha led by Sanjana Singh Pindrawale, how that mattered, how the other movements around that mattered. And I think then you can draw the line of actually why this Punjab Day was set up, because in the absence of any of the established organizations who largely are compromised or have been campaigning with very little success and have been marginalized, what they realized was they needed fresh, independent structure to re-engage. And I think that's where the Vadis Punjab Day really came from.
Okay, no, that's great. Mankamal, if you could just bring you in for a second here. So Jazz touched on, I think, many points on there. I think one in particular, and he ended on it, was Waris Punjab Da, and he touched on the impact of Deep Sidhu earlier, who I believe he's the founder of that party. So taking it back to Amritpal Singh and his kind of, I suppose, explosion on the scene, if you like. I mean, I've reading he was in Dubai not long ago. In particularly breaking it down to Amritpal, Mankamal, what has, in the kind of story that Jazz has laid, what's kind of Amritpal's role today, and kind of how significant is he as a leader, and two, as someone of dharmic appearance too?
What I would say is if we just take it back to Deep Sidhu and we look at his evolutionary journey of Deep Sidhu, so he's been through an individual from Punjab went to the West, he studied in the West, he jumped on a modeling career, he was a actor at some point, and then he found himself as many others at Punjab at that time at the Kisan Morcha. I mean, at one point he was also a supporter of the BJP.
He was a lawyer as well, right?
And a lawyer, and he also supported, people like Sunny Deol. So he's been through an evolutionary journey, and that parallels many people's journey at the end of the day. Now, if you look at it, once you get to that, I mean, I would just envisage that period of the Morcha. No one's ever going to forget that who was involved. That's going to be such a big part of the stories that are going to be told to the grandchildren and the great grandchildren about what happened during that period in on the borders of Delhi. And you look at it, just imagine, when you go to a Sikhi camp and it's intense, and you come back after a week of just complete focus on Sikhi and discussions and talks and whatever. Now just imagine that atmosphere within the Morcha itself, what was going on there at the time, and just imagine how that influenced. Now what you see with Deep Sidhu, I think, and what you started seeing with other people who were sort of attaching themselves to that kind of soch, was that politically they were beginning to understand the situation, but then it was all about what needs to happen on a spiritual level. How do we actually balance that, and how do we actually bring that political thought forward? So without it's back to the concept, without Miri Piri, without that balance, we don't have anything. So the Sikh soul, the Kisan Morcha's soul was the Sikh soul at the end of the day. It was nothing without the Sikh soul. We can say it was about Punjab. Yes, that was the worldly route it took, but the reality of it is that whole soul behind it, the whole underpinning was the Sikh Sangharsh. It was the Sikh Morcha. And Deep Sidhu, unfortunately, with his untimely death, and how we saw him leave so suddenly, I think it was only a matter of months and weeks away from probably adopting that full Gursikh Sarup. I mean, he was talking, he was already promoting, and he was already in those kind of circles. And I think with what we see with Amritpal is that next stage. I think that's where we see it now, is that, okay, we've been through that political soch, we've been through that big morcha, we've galvanized, but that connection has to go back to Anandpur Sahib, that connection has to go back to Keskar Sahib. And, symbolically, if you look at what Amritpal Singh done, in terms of going back to taking all those Naujawan back to Keskar Sahib, back to Anandpur Sahib, and engaging in Amrit Sanchar. And then, I think it was just shy of 1,000 Gursikhs coming out of that Amrit Sanchar. It is a back to roots story. It is, we're looking at a journey here that's taking us back to roots. It's taking us back to what we need to be and where we need to be focused on in order to progress forward. So I think that's the important part of what Amritpal, that's how I take it, of what Amritpal thinks.
There's layers to that, right? Because Amritpal, he didn't come out of nowhere. And obviously within the coverage and the questions, the leading questions of journalists, what they haven't shared is that Amritpal has been around the Waris Punjab Day movement since it started. Diljit Khalsi, another actor who we've met, we've spoken to, even Deep Sidhu's brother, when he came here, we sat down, we spoke with him, and people close to Amritpal, we've had long conversations with. And when you get to, you unpick it all, there were many people that connected with Deep Sidhu, people who knew him, people who didn't know him. And they were inspired by his vision, his inspirational character, his charisma. These are the things which set him apart from many others. And Amritpal was one who also was inspired. And he had many long conversations with Deep, right? These guys were in conversation. And Deep Sidhu must have seen something in Amritpal that we are only getting a glimpse at today, right? When he speaks, because he himself had said, this is our future. So Amritpal is, again, probably at least 20 years younger, 15, 20 years younger than Deep Sidhu, right?
He's 29, I think he's not even hit 30 yet.
Yeah. And so Deep Sidhu had identified Amritpal as a future leader. Probably not as soon as it's happened in reality, as Mike said, the untimely death and the questionable death of Deep Sidhu. But that's what then put Amritpal into the spotlight. He was still living in Dubai, as you said, but he'd always had this connection to the Sikh struggle and the Sikh movement. And I think time will tell, and in terms of how he connects back with that movement. Obviously, he's a lot younger. Deep Sidhu spent time with Shaheed Singh, with Gurjant Singh Bhursingwala. So he had that connection directly and personally. And anyone who's met Shaheed Parwar like that, it has an impact on you that you can't describe. Yeah. So, but I think
the premature, we've got to be very careful. This is just obviously we're putting it out there. We're just future-proofing the fact that at this point in time, Amritpal is very new on the scene as well. And we're still trying to understand and see how he progresses forward. At the moment, what he's saying and what he's putting out there and what he's speaking about, any Gursikh will connect to. You know, it's powerful. You know, it's what we've always wanted to see happening on a larger movement in Punjab. So, you know, he's doing everything, but we've been here before. You know, we have seen flashes that have come. So so what I'm trying to get at is that I think we've all got to manage that as well as a collective as well, in terms of how we the pedestal that we put Amritpal Singh on as well at this point in time, and be cautious.
The people are going to be skeptical about it, and you're seeing this in Punjab. Look, there's two camps, right? Because there's two things about Amritpal which no one can deny. The first is, as Mankamal Singh said, is what he says. The fact that he connected everything, started off with our Guru Sahib. Right? We are like this because we've moved away from our Guru. And once we reconnect, everything becomes a lot clearer and a lot simpler. And he started off his journey. People said, oh, people are sitting outside in Punjab and India. Well, how are they going to do it? He came to Punjab. People said, oh, he's not a Gursikh. He's a Munna, or he's cuts his hair. He's become an Amritdhari. So they will always find something. Yeah. The other thing that really is telling is the similarities that he brings with Sanjana Singh Khalsa Bhindranwale. His style, his the look, the mannerisms, and I'd say
you can argue that's a Gursikh
exactly
persona,
right?
And that's how I see it as well. It's so easy to just say that, you know, he's got a Gursikh persona, and you know, of course, you know, once you align and once you like that, you will always see similarities between Gursikhs. Well,
this is the thing, right? So Sant Bhindranwale, for many of us and many millions, is a hero, right? Absolute hero, ultimate saint soldier, and is in our hearts. And that's who you'd want to emulate. If you could be any Gursikh, right? If you're sitting inside and you sit yourself and you think you would want to be Sanjana Singh, right? None of us are going to achieve that, right? But you always have that desire. As many people have their heroes, they want to be whoever, right? And children would want to or do that. And if you're on the path of fighting for the rights of Sikhi and establishing Sikhi, establish its independent Dharm and combination, then it's naturally you're gonna lean on that history and bring it forward, and you're going to utilize that to connect with the Naujawan of the day. And I think it's galvanized a lot of the Naujawan, and it's put Amritpal in the spotlight. But I think from a Panthak perspective, many people have been supportive of it.
I don't think it's been the media doing it as well. I think as well, there's nothing intentional about what's happened there, in the sense that, you know, you've got a tall Gursikh, and you've got a tall image, a tall image in Santi as well. Yeah. So, you know, these things, you know, I think we can make these connections and you know, make it sound as though there's something more to it. But I think he's just naturally.
But I think you should. Well, I think it's welcomed, right? I mean, anybody taking that role rather than a Gursikh presentation and look, that's what we want, right? And I think that's probably what's threatened a lot of people, if we're honest.
I think so. I was just going to make that point, and going back to what Montgomery said a bit earlier about different leaders who have come and gone, and evidently the thirst in Punjab for such a leader has been there for well over 30 years now, and obviously we're not putting him to that pedestal yet, as we've said, but I think symbolically how he looks, it kind of probably gives nightmares to the same people that Santji did. So it's kind of coming back there. So I just again wanted to touch on the kind of appetite that sort of sits in Punjab within the Naujawan, within the people that vote, within people who want to be politically active, of what's happened over the last 2 years or so. So for the layman's out there, how do we dot the I's and cross the T's on this? Politically, from a landscape perspective, what does this sudden burst of Amritpal Singh onto the scene, what does it actually mean in real terms, guys, in terms of how the pro-Sikh kind of argument moves forward in Punjab?
So if you look, I mean, there's two things, right? One is the community craved a leader for years, as you said, someone that would have the sword and the vision to take the Qawm forward. And many thought Deep Sidhu could be that individual. Unfortunately, he never got the opportunity. And very quickly after that, and we'll come on to it probably a little bit later, but Sidhu Moosewala, through his art and through his music, kept that awakening alive. So there was an absolute appetite and a moment for and a vacuum, you could say, for somebody to step into. And Amritpal, I think, came at the right time. And the route he took, which is the spiritual work, Miri Piri, taking on the mantle that this is a dharmic reawakening and we'll fight for our rights, and making it simple, but also saying really clearly that he has no faith in the political system of India, but is working with those that do. And this is the difference, I think, so is that you've had people that will take one view on one line, and then it kind of gets limited in its implementation and its ability to really mobilize people and get to an end goal, which whatever the objective that is. It can be idealistic great, but it doesn't move on the ground, right?
Okay.
And what you've got with Amritpal is you've got a groundswell of youth, all off the back of the Kisan Morcha. And it's not just youth. You see, you've got the Buzurgs, the elders that have suffered that pain in Delhi on the streets. They're connected to it. And you've then come off the back of the most historic election in Punjab, that two-party system of Congress and the Akali Dal Badal having dominating Punjab politics for probably 50 years, that a third-party entrant has actually smashed that duopoly. And what that indicated is that you can change the system.
Yeah.
And with that, there's brought new hope in Punjab. Not saying not any of that political stuff will help the Sikhs specifically, but this will. Once you then overlay this dharmic movement and awakening of Punjab and Sikhs, that actually gives purpose and momentum to this movement. And what he's done with aligning with Simarjit Singh Maan, who is an elected member of the Lok Sabha now, is that he is working with those that are working within the system. And he is working with those that work in human rights. And he's working with those that work in the grassroots dharmic side. Yeah. Because all of those together give you the strength and the credibility. And I think
that's an important thing. The way that golden thread sort of goes through, because it's very easy for us to always say that, in order to work against the system, you can't join the system or you can't be part of the system. And it's a challenge. It's that big paradox that we have about how far are we meant to take it in terms of our engagement with the current processes and the current systems. But you can't detach and cut yourself off it completely as well. There has to be some kind of transition in getting to the place where you need to get to. But I think, everything boils down to the fact that it has to be grassroots. You don't have those feet on those boots on the ground. You don't have a movement. You don't have anything. And, what you have to see that is that when you see these videos, I mean, what got us engaged with the Kisan Morcha was the sheer volume of people that we see.
Absolutely.
And it was like, wow, you get enticed by that. You think that's just amazing. That's what you want to see. It's not just like, a small group of people here. This is huge. It's massive. And again, with Amritpal Singh, what we're seeing there is that when he is talking, he's in big setups. He's got many thousands of people engaged in that discussion. Now, it's not to say that, nothing was working before Amritpal came along, or he's found something new, whatever. Even Deep Sidhu was the next stage of where we needed to get to. Maharaj puts forward, leaders. They say leaders are born, leaders evolve. I've seen leaders can come up from nowhere, unexpectedly. We wouldn't have thought one day that you're going to get some kind of former model, a Mona, who's going to be so inspirational for Gursikhs. And it came through Deep Sidhu only because he was saying and he was speaking the same language in what we had heard from Gursikhs before. So he had the boli and he had the understanding, and he just didn't have the root.
Absolutely. So and I think it's just on that point you just mentioned. It was similar to what Jazz mentioned earlier about Sidhu Moosewala, and from a different perspective, but how he evolved from his content and from a certain criteria to where it actually ended. That in itself was, and I think
it's quite surreal if you think about it. Yeah,
it had a massive impact. It had a huge impact. People know a lot more about a lot more different things because of, and so it's just to emphasize your point of how the Kisan Morcha really, how it galvanized a lot of these
things. It's the idea, right? The most dangerous thing anyone can have is the idea. And if the idea of what Sant Jarnail Singh really articulated better than anybody before him as well, because the struggle for Sikh independence goes back to 1947 and even before. Right?
Yeah, before that, I would argue that it actually goes back to when
1849, right? Exactly. So when we lost it, Sikhs have always been struggling to regain their kingdom. Sant Jarnail Singh in our generation of Gello in the 20th century was the one who articulated it the strongest and reestablished firm footing, no sugarcoating it, said it straight, right? Real talk, and then backed it up. Right, with real action. And it was agitation after agitation, all peaceful, until the state started its genocides, right? And that silences the calm for many generations. And now you've had the trigger of the farmers reawakening it. But that idea is the same, that every Sikh in their DNA is sovereign and independent. Yeah. And whenever we face discrimination and oppression, we will stand up and fight it. And that's what you've seen today. And it's that idea that threatens the system because he is on a path that will disrupt that system. And what he's doing is mobilizing people to disrupt it peacefully and democratically, which is how revolution and independence movements come about around the world, right? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. And we shouldn't shy away from it because it's happening in Scotland. It's happening in Spain, it's happening all over the world, right? Others have been successful, others are still campaigning. But the danger here, and this is where everyone who's sort of listening to this podcast really needs to sort of grasp one thing, is that it's how it's portrayed and how it's demonized, which is the machinery of the Indian system coming out to play. Because everything caught them off the hook. The farmers' protests caught them off guard. Yeah, we talk about Jaggi's incarceration. That caught them off guard, and how the international community responded to that. And they then resort to everything in the Indian mind is extremism, separatism, terrorism, right? The farmers' protests, all that, and it was laughed out. The worldwide media and the actual Indian media was exposed. And same with Amritpal. They've started with Punjab-based politicians connected to the BJP and Congress that are out there questioning that he's on a path that will bring about bloodshed and the deaths of many Naujawan, right? And I say this, why would, and this is the question I have of anybody in Punjab that questions the actions of of Amritpal and others, is that why is it that if you stand and you speak about human rights and you speak about equality and you talk about civil liberties parallel with every other Punjabi, that equates to you losing your life? Yeah. Why is it that when someone stands up and says, right, we should have equality and our faith should be protected, and if the system, which is the police, the judiciary, the politicians, don't protect you and don't protect your faith, and instead or clamp down on you, that why raising those issues means that thousands of people have to die for that cause? I mean, the question goes straight back onto the state. Why would the state need to kill people who are asking for rights. And that is not a democracy, right? And that's the difference. And that's, I think, the wake-up call for everybody is that on one hand, India claims to be the largest democracy. And on the other hand, it is threatened by one individual who is just talking about basic rights.
Just makes you realize what he's putting himself through in terms of how much of a threat he will actually become. I mean, you read tweets and you see what people say, and they say, well, we'll see. It could well be that we see, a Shahidi very soon. In that respect, what I'm trying to get at is that he has put himself at risk there. So if people have this, like, what's his game plan? He's a plant, he's whatever, he's come, he's been put in there by a third party or whatever. He's putting himself at huge risk out there in what he says and what he speaks about. So we have to acknowledge and accept that as well. We're at safe distance. He's not.
Yeah, look, but Banks, this is the thing, right? Because we fall for these things time and time again, right? Always a plan. And the normal mind would ask, why would you plant someone to reinvigorate a movement that they've been spending 40 years to quash, right? Yeah. You don't resurrect it yourselves, right? And this is the stupidity of it, that people believe, Sarkar, the government have put him in there, right, to kill them. Come on, first of all, you don't do that. When the movements are dying out, the last thing you do is give them oxygen, right? And we know the 2020 the Khalistan referendum worldwide has raised the acceptance of Khalistan as a demand, and a credible demand and a rightful demand in Punjabis across the diaspora. And you've got the Kisan Morcha, which has shown that Delhi can be defeated. That's what that was. That was an absolute demonstration that the government of Delhi and Modi's stranglehold and his untouchability was smashed. And for me, one of the ultimate moments was when the Nishan Sahib was on the Lal Qila. Yes, it was only symbolic, but that is what symbolizes the Khalsa, right? And I think those things is what rocked the system and the state. And I think that political movement coming back to Punjab and getting organized, getting structured at Penda level, re-establishing its structures of what Shahid Bhai Amrit Singh set up was that Panj Pradhani system that, when the state lets you down, don't rely on it. You will have our own governance structures in our pens. And once that was started to be introduced, the state responds. And I think now what you've got is those basic principles. Nothing's new. No one's reinventing the wheel here, right? These are the same things that were from that time are relevant today. And that's the question I ask. Why is it that the demands of 1978 through to 1984 are still so relevant today? That can only be because the Punjab hasn't made progress. If anything, it's gone worse.
I think, they're as relevant as they've ever been, but I think this harks back to because the Morja and what we saw as in the biggest protest in human history, no small feat. All of these things quite clearly signify that something is about to happen. The appetite for revolution and kind of doing these things. I mean, we were talking about it the other day from a UK perspective of, we regularly go to, obviously you guys are really involved in the 84 demo that happens in central London every year. And, we've been going for quite a few years and we were amazed, obviously, and delighted when we were going to the Morje over the last couple of years and the turnouts. And it was sort of harks back to what you were saying, Mance, about joining the dots together of sort of bringing the people who were turned out for the Morja to actually sort of represent and come to the 84 demo as well, because it's one of the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think the appetite is what makes it a bit different at this point than personally I've ever felt before in terms of my limited knowledge of political revolution within Punjab. The atmosphere at this point, based on the last 3-4 years, seems to be as hot as ever. And as ready as ever.
I think, you'll always see this thing as well. There's this thing about young people and what it energizes and how it sort of energizes the entire community. And that's why elders as well, they get a lot of energy from from young blood and young thought and young soch and Naujawan soch. I mean, you know, I joke around with Jazz, you know, even with this Dari that I have now, you know, we're still called Naujawan. And, you know, people still want us to get involved in, you know, not represent Naujawan, but it's about Naujawan soch. It's about young soch. It's about new soch. It's about
energy in it.
Energy, evolution, bringing new thought. And I think that's what's being exciting.
Sorry, I think you've got about 25 years left as a youth yet, so don't worry.
I think that. Believe me, it'll carry on until I become a grandparent. But I mean, you know, but that's fine. You know, it's just because I understand where they're coming from. It's not about age always as well. It is about the soch, and it's about the thought process. And I think that's what's excited everyone in the last few years. What we've seen since 2020, that excitement. Don't forget, I mean, we were reaching a point where we sold a story of Punjab to ourselves that it's a disaster, that it's a complete disaster. Naujawan are hell-bent. They're in nashe. They're out of their head. You know, they're running away. You know, they're jumping on whichever way they can, illegal routes.
The Morcha showed that isn't necessarily true. Yeah,
it showed that energy is there. I mean, we were watching films like Urta Punjab. I mean, I saw that recently. I mean, I didn't see it at the time. I saw it recently, and I thought it brought me on a down, and I thought, okay, maybe that's reality. I can't. And to a certain extent, it probably is. But I mean, that kind of film then portrays this image that what hope has Punjab got? But then again, 2020 came along, and you saw young people, you know, coming on their tractors, standing up against water cannons. And that was that energy that we saw globally. You know, we're watching it here in the UK, and that uplifted us. And, you know, it's had a huge impact globally on the Sikh community as well. You know, I always say this as well. You know, I remember a time, Jazz, you'll know this as well, that it was very difficult to do Sikh-related campaigns and issues in the UK. You know, we had the Gurdwaras working against us. We had other factors working against us. But above all, we had our own community working against us because it wasn't cool. There were too many taboos. They didn't want to get involved, or they didn't want to see anything progress on those kind of movements or any kind of, you know, involvement in Gurdwaras, etc. as well. So, you know, we've seen that change in the last, 10 years with the advent of social media, with more awareness, and that's continually changing as well as we see more people galvanizing and changing their way of thought as well.
So I think it's important. It, right? I mean, as you say, Max, 1984 was probably one of the most controversial items that nobody would even entertain. And if you were a known individual that talks about it, they would stay away from you, right?
Yeah. I mean, you were written off. You were an eccentric. You were a madman. You were whatever.
Exactly. And now we're seeing people invite us to come and talk about 1984, and others who are writing books about it. And you've got mainstream movies. And this is the thing. I mean, you have to open up and welcome anything that raises the spotlight on what happened. Because fundamentally we are a minority, and we're a minority in a minority, in those that stand up for truth and justice and freedom within Sikhi. There are many that are, I would say, just going along their journey, and some that even subscribe to what happened because they've got that Indian sort of overtaken in them. But when you get people, because everybody is affected differently, and everyone can express themselves in their own way. I will do what I can do. Mank will do what he will do. Deep Sidhu did what he will do. Amritpal is doing what he will do. Everyone is different. No one will follow exactly what you want them to. And this has been, I think, our own shortcomings, that we want others to come and do stuff, but we want them to do what's in my head. They should replicate what I'm thinking, not what they might be thinking, right? And if it doesn't fit that mold, they must be anti, and we have to go against them. That has to stop. And I think to a large degree, people have just railroaded over that. And what you've seen is people like not only Sidhu Moosewala, right? You talked about his journey, but he's put a longer lasting legacy on just the water issue, right? That truck has immortalized the discrimination of Punjab and the robbery that's happening in that 3-minute track that no one was able to do to that level, right? And then you've got Diljit Dosanjh, who made other films, but his latest film, Jogi, about the November 1984 genocide, again, brings it to a whole different audience. And people are active in that. And this is what activism is. Activism isn't always standing there with your Dastar, your City Sab, and fighting on the front line. Activism is working within the systems, within the structures, to expose them and ultimately not always bring them down, but raise yourselves up.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you're going to see watered down versions as well. I mean, that's the criticism that we may have on what perhaps Diljit Dosanjh puts out there. But you're right, Jazz. I mean, the reality is that, you do it within the remit that you can do it. Diljit Dosanjh will see that he's doing some kind of awareness campaign with his films and how he's portraying it there. We may expect more because we want the brutal reality and the gritty reality of it. But you're right, he's put it out there. He put it on Netflix and it went out there, and a new audience would have seen it and started thinking about that era and that period and realizing what it's all about as well. So it's important, that activism exists in many different forms. We have to be able to embrace and align and come together at some point. This is where Soch is so important. This is where you can have your political movements. But if you go back to that spiritual Gursikh Soch, and we're all going back and looking back towards Anandpur Sahib and getting our focus there again, then we automatically start aligning. So, you'll have your differences. I don't always agree with Jazz. I don't always agree with Sukh. But at the end of the day, we still know our foundation underpinning our Soch aligns in some way. So that's why it's so important what Amritpal Singh is doing. It's so important to get it back there, because we lose track. We become political. We become over-politicized. We forget, our
and just by its very nature, right? Politicians will have to be compromised at some stage, which is why his most valuable point that I heard him say was he won't get engaged in politics directly because it compromises you, right? That's just part and parcel of going down that route. And to stay true to your vision and your objective, you can't be looking to compromise, not on Sikhi principles. And that's what Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was so principled, whilst the Akali leaders at that time were compromising. And I think what we need is the political representation that now comes from this to be as dedicated and as committed to the cause. That's where, if you think of that, there's a lot of things that sort of the movement struggled with in the 80s. But one of the bigger things was, whilst we had the grassroots and the dharmic side 100%, the political side were willing to not only sell out but totally undermine the movement. And then you're really struggling. And then the international side, the coverage to legitimize that wasn't there, right? We weren't mature enough as a diaspora there, which is what the big difference is now, right? There's two massive differences what Amritpal can benefit from. The one is social media, that is not dominated by one state-sponsored TV or radio. The truth,
although he's struggling, we've seen the suspension of his Twitter account, etc. So we can say that, but social media is still exposed for what it is.
All three of us are withheld, right? So all three of us are feeling that censorship, right? So it comes part and parcel. But what you then have is many other individuals who are recording live, right? So the truth does get out there, and it's reaching millions of people instantly, right? Without any manipulation, and people aren't bothered about the commentary anymore. They're not listening to the commentary of individuals because they've seen it, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing is the biggest thing is the diaspora. Sikhs in the UK, Canada, America, all over Europe, and all over the world, in fact, are well established now. Political links. We talk about the UK. We've got 2 Sikh MPs. Hopefully, we'll have many more, triple that in the coming election. But people who've grown up with this, and we are, like with the farmers' protest, we were able to reach politicians and governments and senior ministers, and at least make it uncomfortable for them and force them to speak up, no matter how much they didn't want to with India, but they were compelled to. And I think this is another thing. However this movement progresses, and it is early days, but no movement will achieve anything if we all sit on the sidelines waiting for it to fail. That's the one message I want to really end with on this conversation. Is if we all just say we're just going to wait and see, then all you have is the same few daring to walk the path. And when they inevitably are outnumbered or outgunned, then we all say, there you go, we told you so. Right? Yeah. But if you're walking behind him, then they might take out the first line, the second line, but that line is never ending.
Yeah.
And that's what will make the difference, because if they do waver, when they look back, and this is why the Kisan Morcha was so important and was successful, because when those Kisan Union leaders were wavering and wanted to do a deal, they looked back and saw there's 500,000 Kisans there that are not going to accept it. They were compelled to keep fighting. And that is, sometimes you need that with leadership. Leadership sometimes needs that backing and pressure that they have to keep riding.
Gives them the mandate. Forward. They need a mandate as well. Yeah, exactly. You're right. And it comes through the people. And that's what it is, and that this is where the Panthik mandate becomes so important. But you're right, 100%. I agree with you there. Amritpal, we're with him. We've got to see it as that. He's a Gursikh Veer. He's leading, and we have to align with it, and we have to see it, and we have to believe it, and we have to feel it. And that's how I see it at this point in time, and we do. I think most Gursikhs who align with that source do see it and do feel it. But it's disheartening to see some of the social media commentary, and how it goes back to what I'm saying is that there was a point in time where it wasn't cool to be Sikh. It's cool to be Sikh now. It's cool to address Sikh issues, but we are not doing it perhaps full-heartedly,
with integrity,
with integrity and with sincerity and with the underpinning of Gurmat and Sikhi, and back to what it should be, and that's the big issue. And this is where the Amritpal connection is very important now, to see how that is meant to be done.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I think we've reached the end of the first Sikh Network podcast. It's been fantastic having you both on, and just want to thank you both for obviously appearing on. And just to everyone listening, this is the first of regular podcasts that we'll be looking to touch on a variety of issues with a variety of guests. So keep an eye out and sort of for future episodes. And if you check our social media, the Sikh Network, both on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, you'll see further news and kind of links about when next episodes are. And by all means, let us know of who you'd like to see on and what you'd like to see discussed, because we're pretty open, aren't we, guys, into within the Sikh realm of discussion points we can have on these shows. So so thanks again both. It's been great, and up until the next time. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Welcome to the Sikh Network Podcast, a weekly podcast discussing current and topical issues affecting Sikhs across the global diaspora.